talk about today's webinar / podcast recording, I would like to introduce you to today's panelists. We are joined today by three excellent subject matter experts. Our head of performance, Barbara Steele, she's the head of our performance practice. Hello, Barbara. Ester Neznanova, the head of our diversity and inclusion practice. Hello, Esther. Hope we can see you on VR. And Khalil Smith, our VP of Consulting and Research here at NLI. Hello, Khalil. Today's conversation will be facilitated, as always, by our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock. Hi, David. I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, sir. Are you there?
Thanks very much, Gabe. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes, and now I can see you.
Fantastic. Great to be here with you all. Thanks, Barbara, Esther, and Khalil for joining us. Maybe stay on camera for a minute. We'll kind of get things started. Barbara, you've gone. There we go. Then we'll get you to go off in a minute. But thanks very much for being here. So Khalil heads up all the practices and also runs culture and leadership, and Esther and D&I and Barbara in performance. We're going to really be hearing about the first 90 days. What do I mean by that? Well, at NLI, we've been thinking about this crazy world and what to do about this from a brain perspective, literally for 3 months. We started early March. So we're going to share out all this data we've been collecting from you guys and from others, from thousands and thousands of people across events. We're going to share out kind of what we've been thinking about, what we've been seeing. Those of you just coming online, just quick housekeeping, you know, the chat, use the chat for comments. Nice to put in there where you're calling from. You can kind of see the breadth of people here. You can post questions in the Q&A. We're not sending out recordings unless you're a corporate member or client. Sorry, we're not sending out slides, but we will send out recordings after this. We will watch the chat. I'll watch the chat a bit, so you can use that. You can also comment, kind of share ideas with each other as well, which is a nice thing. So I want to kick off, just give you a sort of some new language from us at NLI, just who we are. We're a cognitive science consultancy making organizations more human through science. It's almost like we wrote that for this time, but we wrote that well over a year ago. It's certainly a time to help companies be more human. It's one of the biggest things folks are asking for. And our mission is finding the most effective habits that drive change. Any kind of change, more inclusive, more agile, more able to focus through a crisis. Find the most effective habits that drive change, and then build the most effective habit activation strategies that scale or at scale. That's really what we do. We're sort of getting clear about that. And I know we've been helping many of you identify those just right habits and then scaling those to really drive change. So that's what we do. And Khalil and Barbara and Esther are really key to the thought leadership and the execution of this work. And we'll hear from them as we go. If you guys go on mute, if you'd like, and then we'll bring you in kind of one at a time. I want to do a quick, like 10 minutes or so of kind of what we've been thinking about over the last 3 months around build a better normal. And not a new normal, but a better normal. And I just want to say, this is maybe once in a lifetime opportunity in the talent space to do the biggest things and the most impactful work you've ever done in your life. This may be, if you're in the talent space, the opportunity to do the work of your life, because people have so much more openness and there's such a greater like willingness to really kind of escalate the human issues than there's ever been. So we've been thinking about that a lot. We think there are 3 kind of levels to think about right now as you focus on people staying okay day to day, make this situation sustainable, given it could be a long time. Also then leverage the moment. That's the big one. How do we really leverage the moment? So I'm going to just give you a very quick walk through the first chunk and the second chunk. Then we're going to hear from Khalil on the big one. Then we'll get into the practices. But this is what we've been thinking about around kind of staying okay day to day. What's this about? Buffers, signals, and systems. In summary, and some of you will have seen this if you've been following us, in summary, this is a challenge right now, this crisis of maintaining just a manageable threat state, a level 1 threat state. And a level 1 threat state is a state we're often in at work when we sort of remember we've forgotten a deadline and suddenly focus. Unfortunately, we're hitting level 2 and level 3 a lot. Things have definitely improved. Things have come back up. People are in a much better state right now. But it's been a crisis of basically not getting overly anxious because your anxiety level and your ability to focus are anti-correlated. Higher anxiety, the harder it is to focus, and it gets really difficult. So we've been collecting data. We got a really interesting data set that about 1,400 talent folks thought managers were averaging about 1.46. Similar number, think employees are averaging about 1.85. So quite a big difference, about half a number. quite a big difference between frontline employees and managers, and essentially the frontline employees not doing very well. 1.85 on the scale we use is very strong threat. Definitely reduced productivity, definitely reduced effectiveness, reduced perception, cognition, everything. So it's a really interesting challenge. We've been writing a lot about this, about threat level. We've written a number of pieces. Maybe my team can put some in the chat, sort of some of the key pieces we've published in Forbes, other places on kind of how to think about this. And so the real challenge is helping individuals put in place buffers for themselves, and then signals to others, and then systems across the board. And think of a buffer as kind of a space between, like a padding between you and a threat response and something coming at you. What you've got to do is take out the negative things and add some positive things. So, you know, the world's very uncertain. You've got to take out things that create that uncertainty, like the news. Add in things that increase certainty, like actually building a really fantastic schedule for you. And so you got to put in place these buffers for you to be very intentional about moving through this, and then signals that you send to others that literally leave people better than you found them. So we've been thinking a lot about that and sort of the critical habits. We've briefed over 100,000 leaders since early March on this issue across these events and in-house events we've been doing for thousands and thousands of leaders. We've been teaching folks basically, how do you very intentionally focus on just the right habits for you, like literally one a week? How do you choose the just right habit to buffer you? How do you send the just right signals to others? And then how do you put the systems in? And a lot of this anchors on SCARF. This is the framework we've been using: take care of yourself, look after each other, deliver what matters. So buffers for you to take care of yourself, signals for others to look after each other, and then a big growth mindset to deliver what matters. So, you know, this is the kind of feedback we've had from the in-house versions of this when we run these early briefings. It's literally giving people language to understand what's going on in this space. We've also launched an open enrollment program. We've had hundreds and hundreds of participants in that, called Focus. If you're from an organization and you're interested potentially in a free pass in that, if you just put Focus program in the chat right now, someone will follow up with you. We can't guarantee a place, but if you're from an organization, we are giving away at the moment for the next month or so free places in our open program. And essentially it's literally an hour on take care of yourself with a group, an hour on look after each other, an hour on deliver what matters, over 3 weeks. Very, very powerful, very, very powerful framework. So just put Focus program in the chat if you're from an organization and interested potentially in a free place in that. But we're running that in-house as well. But here's the cliff note. People aren't doing that well. It doesn't take that much to help them do a lot better. We find that having clear language for the critical things you can do, not everything you can do, but the best things to do, is really key. So clear language and the right habits. You know, if you say, how do you be more resilient? There's 100 things. Look up Google, there's 100 things. We'll show you actually the 2 or 3 most important things to focus on, and then really dig into that. So that's the stay okay. Make work from home sustainable. Let's look at that. The big piece there is kind of, you know, productivity, sustainability, all of this. There's some conundrums in this data. There's some really interesting conundrums in this data for sure. One of them is people are actually saying that they're more productive. So 40% the same or higher productivity, 30% just as productive, 30% less productive also, but you know, 70% the same or more. This aligns with earlier research showing that, you know, work from home gives you about a 20% bump in productivity on average, literally a day a week more productive going to work from home. So there's, you know, we're starting to see this understanding that it can happen. At the same time, we're not very sustainable, right? So this is data we've got from about 235 people. You know, what pace are you going at? So look at that big number, 37%. So 37% of people think you can do it for maybe several months, 22% maybe a month, 6% for days or weeks. If you add those top 3 numbers up, it's a pretty big number. It's nearly 2/3 of people say it's days, weeks, a month, or several months. That's what they got. Only a quarter are saying 6 months, and only 8% think this is sustainable, this pace. So just, you know, just think about that for a minute. This is an experience everyone's sharing. Only about 1/3 of people think this is, you know, long-term sustainable or sustainable for 6 months. 2/3 of people think this is not very sustainable at all, which is an interesting contrast to that first data point, isn't it? So people are more productive, but they can't keep it up, right? And then there's this data point. It's interesting. this is a smaller set, but we're seeing this across the board. How much of your own work are you getting to? So yeah, some people are more effective. In this case, 10%. We think that number will be probably 10 to 20% are actually more effective. But a really big number are getting to between 50 and 100% of their work. Definitely degraded. That's, again, about 2/3. The people who are only getting 25 to 50%, that's not such an issue, right? The people getting a really small amount, definitely an issue. But the middle are definitely not getting to their own work. So we've been thinking about strategies for that, like leave Monday and Tuesday morning open, no meetings, for people to get their own work done while they're quiet. 25 and 50-minute meetings, mixing up the Zoom meetings, all this kind of stuff. So there are really good strategies that you can apply to this issue. But there's a few kind of conundrums in there. And here's the big one. I'd love to get a poll from you guys on this. This is sort of the big question is, how many people want to be back in the office? So if you have data on this, we'd love for you to click one of these poll numbers. Do we have that poll coming up? There we go. If you have data on this, we'd love you to click this. If you have no data, you have no idea, maybe don't click. Or if you have a really good sense of it, click. Ideally, if you have data, how many people want to be back in the office? What do you think that number is in your organization? Fantastic. Let's get a few more people. What do you think how many people want to be back in the office? We got 200 coming through. Let's close that off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, fantastic. So how many want to be back in the office? Here we go. What percentage of your employees want to be back in the office? The big numbers, between 20 and 40% of people want to be back in the office, right? 40 to 60%, only 20% of you. Under 5% want to be back in the office. We heard from a company yesterday, they said 2.5% want to be back in the office. 5% if they had a gym, if the gym was open, which it's not. So, interesting, but it's waiting, it's waiting around the middle. Now, what I want you to think about with that is what are the implications? What are the second order effects if a third even want to be back, if a third don't want to be back in the office and really won't be? What are the implications if only a third if a third are going to really, really be pushing for more on this? What are the implications to that? I think we're going to end up with a blend. We're going to end up with a lot of people in the office full-time, a lot of people in the office part-time, a lot of people not in the office. The implications, I can tell you, one of them for learning is you're going to have to do almost all your learning virtually because it'll be exclusive otherwise. And for meetings, you're going to have to do most of your meetings virtually anyway. So you're actually going to want to really nail it on virtual meetings and virtual learning. I think these are really critical things to invest in because we're going to have lots of people not willing to be back in the office. So those are the big things on leverage the moment. Just one quick comment, then we'll get to Khalil. This is some data on kind of where are you focused. About 45% of people are actually putting most energy into leveraging the moment, the big things. About 35% making work from home sustainable is their priority, and about 20% staying okay. So we're really starting to see a shift now of focusing on leveraging the moment. That's really great. I want to say one more thing about this. I think this is where you have to focus. I think you have to put a lot more focus onto leveraging the moment. The momentum from these emotions people have won't last long. It's real momentum. It's maybe once in a lifetime momentum to really do difficult things, particularly around culture and learning. Everything stopped is incredibly rare. Plus you've got the fact that you're going to have to do meetings and learning virtually really for a long, long, long time, maybe forever. So just, sit with that. As terrifying as that is, there's a lot of implications to that. So let's dig in. I'm going to take questions kind of more focused on the practices as we go. Let's have a look. Khalil, you want to come on? There we are. I can see you. Good to have you with us.
Good to be here. Seeing all the activity in the chat is wonderful. So excited to see people kind of contributing and reacting to what you're talking through. Likewise, I have a bit of data, David, that I would love to share with the group, and I'll ask you to kind of drive some of these slides. So one of the things that we have asked, and you see here the sample size, about 400 people, a little bit over 400, how has your organization positively surprised you? And that ability to work from home has been, I think, a real benefit and a real boon to a lot of people. It's been a necessity in a lot of organizations. The other thing that we're seeing is this speed and openness to rapid change. So you've talked about this quite a bit, right? This idea that a lot of organizations thought, oh my gosh, there's no way we can do that. And then all of a sudden we were forced to. Or it's going to take us 2 years to roll that thing out. And I'm now talking to organizations that have said, well, we had to figure out how to do it in 2 days. And so the speed has really amplified. This next one, the magic you want to maintain. So there are 2 numbers I'd really call out here. One is around flexibility and that 41%. The second is the one that you see down at the bottom, that human first connection. So we keep hearing, and I've spoken with well over 100 kind of chief HR officers and chief talent officers over the past couple of weeks. And they're saying our organizations are more human than they've ever been. Our leaders are communicating, our people are participating with one another. How do we really maintain this? How do we keep this when there isn't something right in front of us? And we've been talking about something for quite some time. So I'll go to the next slide. This idea of priorities, habits, and systems. This is how we define change at scale and culture change. And I think none of us would argue with the idea that COVID-19 has been the priority. That has been the thing that has driven us to go to where we need to and taken us from it's going to take 2 years to we can do it in 2 days. What we have not yet gotten, and this is part of what I love about being at NLI, is the thing that we focus on are the habits. And so what we're seeing right now is reactions from people. And the past couple of weeks have been more about how do I react? How do I kind of make things happen in the moment? Where we haven't yet really anchored and gotten it right is in the habits and the systems. And so those are the places we're really going. And I'd love for you to kind of head to the next slide so that we could talk a little bit about what those habits need to maintain. And so the first principle is kind of these 3 main elements. One is to create the strongest possible insight. So David, you were talking about learning before. Learning is absolutely different now. It is changing, and I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit, but facilitating the strongest possible insight in social situations. So even though we're social distancing, how do we maintain those connections and maintain that relationship and really lean into that? And then ideally 1 habit at a time, because we're already cognitively overwhelmed. And so much of our learning has been, here are these 15 things that we need you to learn and do differently by the time this 3-hour workshop is over. Got it, right? Okay, we're good. You have to slow down. You have to be able to be more deliberate about that. So I'd love to pause here because you've spoken with hundreds of companies about these. What jumps out at you about now?
It's such a fascinating time. I mean, I have not seen I've never ever in 10 years of thinking this way, I've never seen a 2-day workshop that I couldn't make radically more effective as 3 or 4, or at the most like 6, but it's rare, 3 or 4 like literally 1-hour sessions. Over 3 weeks virtually. Let me say that again. I haven't seen a 2-day workshop I couldn't make radically better in terms of activating real habits in like 3 to 6. No, it's never less than 3, but it's never more than 6. It's usually 3, 4, at most 5. And it basically follows this principle. In an hour, if you focus on one thing, like, authentic empathy, right? You can actually create really strong insights on a platform with people if you architect, for attention and for insight. If you make attention and insight your core drivers, you can get incredible attention, incredible insight in the exercises. You can make it very social. Actually, Zooms can be even more social than meeting in person. You see everyone, including yourself, really richly.
For better or worse.
Doesn't work in a workshop, right? And then the 1 habit at a time is so critical because the spacing effect is such a big thing. So we've said this for years, but right now, actually, people are kind of being forced to shift to this framework or potentially to this framework of really learning over time. And it's radically more effective for activating habits at scale. You want to dig into this, Khalil?
Yeah, I was just going to say everything you're talking about absolutely connects to this. And you'll see here, we've got over 650 different respondents that have come in. And what they're looking at doing is significantly innovating on the content and the delivery. And so in some ways, the 20% have said, well, we just need to innovate in terms of delivery because we know that people are working from home. We know we'll have limited people in the office. But almost 4 out of 10 are saying, well, actually, David, exactly what you're describing. This is an amazing opportunity to break ourselves out of the the kind of safety bias and the experience bias of we've been doing it this way. We've always had leadership development this way. We've always taught this particular skill this way. And therefore it's very difficult to change. And what they're doing is largely coming to us and saying, how do we completely reinvent it and do it very differently? And that's one of the
rare
things
opportunity
we've been
to do
having
that.
a lot of conversations about. Exactly. It's a moment in time.
Probably a once in a lifetime opportunity to say we're going to radically overhaul, leadership development and learning, either or both of them, like radically overhaul it. And believe me, you can really radically overhaul it. These are some of the things that people are asking. About 50% wish they could rethink their overall learning strategy and architecture, kind of need help with that. It is hard. I mean, learning, we have a framework called coherence, which is the structural integrity of ideas. And actually you should have just as much discipline and like real science in the architecture of a learning strategy as you do in the architecture of a building. You should have just as much rigor and data and like coherence in the architecture of a learning strategy as you do in a building. But people, it is actually a whole kind of art and science in itself. But folks are also interested in some of these other things. But that's
and right now is the opportunity to rebuild that, right? To your point about the building and that metaphor, if it's completely different or we're moving, we can do it differently. Leadership retreats is another place that we're hearing quite a bit. Organizations are saying, and again, I kind of lead our culture and leadership space. What they're saying is leadership has almost never been more important than it is right now. People are looking to their senior most leaders for guidance, for feedback, for coaching, for comfort. We're hearing a lot in the chats around things like compassion and communication. And so they recognize that leadership retreats are not a nice to have, they actually are still an imperative. And so the question is not, do we do them, but how do we do them? And so there's another place we've been leaning in is to say, well, again, you don't want people sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours the same way we might have done that previously. How do we reinvent what we're going to do? How do we stretch it out a little bit? So it will never be the same.
Yeah, we've been helping some clients with this. We've got a number of projects going at the moment where they were thinking of, canceling their retreat because they were like, we bring people together for 4 days in person. How can we reproduce that? The answer is you can't reproduce that. You can actually do better.
Yeah.
You can actually do much better. As examples, like do a 90-minute session in the morning, 90-minute session in the afternoon, like on 2 days of the week for 4 weeks, right? You'll get massively more benefits from that than you will from a 4-day event of any sort, because you can iterate and experiment, get people having to go back and teach back stuff. 2 days a week for 4 weeks or for 2 weeks, whatever it is, bringing folks together powerfully, massively more effective. You're definitely different. People won't be drinking and doing stuff, but you can definitely, you actually can do everything just differently. You can get the networking, you get the informal learning, and you can do the whole thing radically cheaper, radically more effective as well.
And they may still be drinking, they just won't be drinking together. So
quarantini will be happening. Right?
Exactly. But this is exactly what you're describing, David. So what we see on the left is, age is the science of making learning stick. And on the right is coherence, the architecture of effective learning. So to your point around, none of us could have anticipated this moment in time, but so much of the work that NLI has been doing has been building the frameworks and working with organizations for the better part of a decade to say, as you continue to go virtual, as you prepare yourself for whatever that major disruption or transformation may be, we didn't know it would be this dramatic, but everything that we're seeing here and we've heard it from clients. You and I have both spoken with people that said, wow, we rolled out all of these things. We never would have known that it was going to prepare us for this moment in time, but we're so much better prepared because we rolled out growth mindset, because we were really deliberate about the effort that we put into preparing our population.
Right. Yeah, no, that's been really interesting. So these learning audits, let me just describe this. So we've been doing an experiment, literally an experiment. We're sort of trying it for a month or so, where we've been offering free learning strategy audits. So lots of people are struggling with how do we take our learning, leadership development or all of learning, how do we make that virtual? We've got a ton of research on that space. We've been in that space forever. We've been doing virtual learning for nearly 20 years, literally. Virtual learning is our expertise. We have data showing it's better than in person. We know how to do it. So we've been doing these virtual learning strategy audits with like the head of talent, head of HR if they can come, the chief learning officer, learning team, and basically digging into kind of what's your hypothesis and then showing you what the actual science says. If you're from an organization and you're interested in that, just put learning strategy audit in the chat. Someone will reach out to you. It's an hour. It's Khalil or myself or some of our other senior consultants, Steve, all sorts of people, depending sort of who's available, but learning strategy audit, we'll basically, hear from you what your strategy is, then we'll show you the science. You get a ton of free consulting basically on what to do differently. And then, sometimes we'll see an opportunity we can help with, but in and of itself, it's a really useful tool. A couple of things that we're seeing, many people are transferring the same ideas into structure and virtual, like Don't take a 3-day classroom and turn it into 3 days in a row of like 4-hour Zooms. Disastrous, not necessary. There is an opportunity to massively improve the architecture. So you're focused on essential, not exhaustive. And there's an opportunity to massively improve the learning delivery. You've just got to kind of solve for the right things, right? Don't solve for the technology, solve for attention and insight and action, right? You know, that you got to solve for really different things. And yeah, so we're happy to, anyone who's from an organization, just put learning strategy, someone will reach out and see if it makes sense for us to spend an hour free consulting with you on that.
David, I'm seeing a lot of learning strategy audits. I don't think you and I are going to be getting a lot of sleep, but I'm here for that. I like
There's a bigger team that are interested in that. But I think the opportunity is to, you know, really decrease costs, like literally take a quarter of your costs out, increase scale and speed, and actually see bigger impact. I think that's the opportunity here. About 25% less cost, rationalize a lot of suppliers, actually do a lot of it yourself. You know, really rethink for the future how to do it. And it's not about any particular technology. Whatever technology you already have probably will work. Overall.
And I think the next slide, David, this is an important one because I think a lot of times there's a feeling that there's a trade-off, that by doing these things remotely, we're going to have to actually deliver less. And you spoke to this before, this idea that actually the spacing can be really beneficial. Using less time to really get deliberate about what we want to focus on can be really beneficial. So we actually have quite a bit of data that shows that our distributed learning solutions, the one we see on the far right, are actually more effective at behavior change than some of the bringing people together and having them sit in the same place. So you can do it for significantly less and get a better impact.
Yeah.
I don't know any business that wouldn't be up for that.
It's literally the percentage of people now activating a desired habit a month later. So you've got, like, that's a pretty significant bump, 2/3 up to 80%. And the workshop, the DLS, is essentially a distributed learning solution, completely virtual, completely scalable, could impact a company of 500,000 people in a month, with 80% of people now activating a habit that you want them to do, whatever that is. So it's really big. You know, as you're thinking about learning, there's a shift from coherence to, you know, from novelty to coherence, from distributing content to habit activation, from, you know, exhaustive to essential, from training to high impact learning in short bursts. There's a bunch of kind of mindset shifts to execute there. But I think that's it. We've got time for Khalil. I know you're speaking to, you know, hundreds of people. You're running sessions, I think, twice a month. Is that right?
That's correct.
Topic. So you're running sessions twice a month. And folks, if you're a senior in, you know, culture and leadership, we're able to get you with Khalil, you know, a couple of times a month in a small group to discuss, you know, kind of what's going on. I know there's a lot going on in growth mindset. We didn't get much to say about that. Any other quick trends before we wrap up that you're seeing out there?
No, I want to get to Barbara and to Esther as well, but please continue to put kind of thoughts into the chat and we can respond to them there. If you're interested in setting up some time, let us know. Happy to get on the phone and talk about some trends that you may be seeing in your business or things that we're seeing that can be helpful to you. Thanks, David.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Khalil. Barbara, you want to come on? Thanks very much, Khalil. Thanks for being the work that you're doing. There we are. Now we can see you.
Excellent.
So you've been running sessions as well, twice a month. How many folks have you presented to now in these smaller groups?
Yeah, easily, David, over 100. So it's been exciting, obviously, to connect with talent leaders and hearing from them in terms of what's top of mind with respect to performance. And that's what we want to talk about, you know, for the next few minutes is the conversations that we've been having.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a long history. This is actually our oldest practice. Barbara heads up the practice. We've been in this space probably 15 years, one way or another. We've published 3 significant industry research papers available to members and a whole ton of science papers, and really done, I mean, the work we've done has impacted really thousands of companies have changed their strategy one way or the other through some of the work that we did. Tell us about the trends that are happening, Barbara. What are you seeing from these sessions and what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, David, before we move on, I'm sorry, if we can go back to the research slide, I have to do a shameless plug because as you know, right before COVID, we were ready to launch our white paper based on our most recent research in performance. So COVID hit, and of course, we decided it was important to make sure that that white paper, the study reflected the current climate. So on the one hand, we were disappointed, but actually it has given us this opportunity. And so I just want to plug that for everybody who's on, that we'll be releasing that soon. And so it'll be great that actually we have this, you know, fantastic research, late breaking, because it does reflect kind of this massive disruption that we've been dealing
coming
with.
out? When's that coming out?
It kind of depends on you, David, but hopefully in the next few weeks.
Oh no, not me. It's a bottleneck again. So the new study on performance management in you know, during a time of, you know, craziness. Tell us about some of the trends.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. So what you're seeing here, everybody, is essentially from, like we've been talking about, all of the talent leaders that we've been having conversations with. Here are the things that are top of mind and what they're grappling with. First is just, given the disruption and how, of course, everything has been impacted, what do you do with performance? Like, how do you adapt it? How do you make it flexible? How do you make it work? Not just for the time, but beyond. Secondly, what do you do with conversations? Because since you can't really lead the entire kind of performance system like you ordinarily would, and yet, you know, what we've been talking about is just how pivotal conversations are and connecting during this time is. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, just feedback. That's been a very interesting topic, certainly paradoxical, because, you know, naturally feedback, as we certainly understand, is an area that tends to elevate threat in people. And so that's the last thing that you want to do when we're in this
Tough
heightened
dynamic.
time. Right.
Tough dynamic. People are already threatened. They actually need more
Yeah,
feedback, but actually.
exactly, David, which we'll talk with everybody about here in just a few moments. And so before, David, we go to adapting the approach, we do have a poll. And so I want to
Great.
ask Anna to share it with everybody. I don't know if you have the slide, David, that's okay. I can actually talk everybody through it. So basically, since we are talking about and seeing how so many organizations are being faced with having to adapt their performance approach, so we just want to hear from you, like, what's been the primary driver for you? Are you really, you know, dialing into making your process like more people-centric? Is it more about streamlining administrative requirements? Are you focused on costs, obviously because of the current climate? Like, we want to get a sense from you, you know, be able to validate. We know what we're hearing, but would like to have some hardcore data in terms of what people are actually doing. So it looks like, David, we're getting some good numbers here. And the way we're seeing the responses, it's actually aligning with what we've been hearing anecdotally from the more than 100 talent leaders that we've been working with. Heavy emphasis on people centricity.
We'll close
This
it
is
off in
fantastic.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close it off.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, everybody, for taking a moment just to do that for us. We really appreciate it. So with respect to, David, we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so it's
Dialing
about
in.
half is more people-centric, which is really interesting as we look at the data. About
Mm-hmm.
half folks is to make it more people-centric, which is really,
Mm-hmm.
really good to see.
It is so great to see. And that is really just the upside of, you know, obviously with all the challenges associated with COVID, it's great to see that one of the outcomes is it's allowing organizations to pay closer attention to how can they actually adapt their performance systems so that they are in fact people-centric. And so here are the questions that we're hearing from talent leaders in terms of what's top of mind for them, right? Because on the one hand, you want to make sure that you have a system that is in fact fair. And how do you ensure that when so much change is afoot from people's roles and the distribution of work and what have you? And so that is what talent leaders are having to answer is, how do we make sure the performance process is relevant and it works in the way that is needed, and yet do it in a way where people still feel motivated and inspired and that it's fair. It's interesting that when we have polled talent leaders on this topic to say, how do employees think about this? Because we've seen talent leaders be more kind of conservative and wanting to, in a good way, right? So being very much thoughtful about the people, wanting to kind of put the brakes on, you know, having a lot of burden or anything that would actually increase stress for people. If we go to the next slide, David. Interestingly, when we asked talent leaders, like, how do your employees feel about this? And they said, as you can see here from the response, everybody, they said 53% are actually concerned about how they're going to be evaluated, like how will this be taken care of? And 35% are really concerned. So on the one hand, we've heard leaders say we want to relax the standards a bit. We don't want it to be a burden. We don't want to increase threat for people. And yet you see how employees are saying, yeah, but I'm also keen on how is this going to work? How will I be assessed? How do I know where I stand, essentially? So that's the interesting dynamic with this first trend. What our tip is, David, for everybody, because we've heard from talent leaders as they're thinking about ways to adapt and relax, a lot of conversation around moving towards no ratings. So even just as recent as earlier this week, we heard talent leaders say that they're looking to either do away with ratings or certainly do it during this time where they have an opportunity to try it out.
Right.
And so that's the tip we would say, David, is we encourage you to leverage this moment, because it seems like key stakeholders, due to the climate, are more open to trying some things differently.
Yeah.
And then also because of recognizing this is this period of creativity, they are keen for trial and error, like it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have a poll on that? I wasn't sure. I think we were going up.
No, yeah, we're done with that one. Next poll, actually, yes, Anna, if we can go ahead and flash it, because now we want to move to key conversations. And so everybody, we would love to hear from you in terms of since we're seeing how during this time of COVID, just how important conversations are. So how confident are you in terms of your organization's efforts to have prepared your managers for this time and their ability to have these key conversations? So would love to get your perspective here.
Yeah, some good numbers coming in. A lot of energy around this one.
Yeah, not surprising, David, because time and time again, this is what talent leaders have said is also really top of mind for them.
I was talking with a client or company recently, and they said the CEO hadn't met with his team yet since the start of COVID. This was last week.
Wow.
I'm like, wait, what?
Wow.
Like the brain with the CEOs just was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Couldn't like, that's not good.
Yeah, that's incredible.
That sends a message down. Contrast that with, folks who, every week the, top leaders are, sharing personal things and really being open and vulnerable, all this stuff. Let's see the data here. Really interesting. So the biggest number, managers are struggling. Yep, 39%. Managers struggling with conducting conversations, close behind, well, for the most part.
Thanks everybody for that feedback, because again, you're helping validate what we've been hearing. And so that's what talent leaders have said is, conversations are important, period, in performance management. Of course, the whole approach to continuous performance management is predicated on that very fact. And yet, when you compound that with massive disruption like COVID, it really is putting a spotlight on the skill gap that's there. So we have we'll highlight a few things from a data perspective, and then we have a couple of suggestions here before we wrap up.
Yeah.
First thing to just mention on, here's the frame, David, we can go to, you showed that slide already. So the 6 conversations that we anchor on, basically the 2 that organizations are prioritizing are goal setting and check-ins. And so when we've polled talent leaders about, so how much bandwidth do managers have in this regard, you can see how they've responded. They said, look, they can absolutely do the check-ins, and maybe they're 5 or 10 minutes, but just making sure that they're having those connections, that's what they're doing. Talent leaders are absolutely loving that. And still, they want to see more of that kind of connecting taking place and have that and see that really being embedded inside of the culture.
Yeah, just a quick comment. If you're not, so if you're new to NLI, one of the things you can do is become a corporate member, and you'll see tons of content like webinars and summit sessions we've run with experts and white papers, all sorts of things that kind of just for the performance practice. The performance practice has like a decade of content you can draw from on all the research you'd want around ratings, all the research you'd want around conversations. This is one of the ways we architect our thinking on performance management. There's 6 separate conversations, and it's really important as a company to have a really clear strategy for each of these. So how frequent, what form, how do they work, what does great look like? So we think you want to separate out. These are 6 quite separate conversations. And we've got a whole lot of thinking on that. So we do a lot of work helping companies basically build this strategy in a kind of pure consulting work. And then what Barbara was relating to is the particular focus on kind of check-ins right now. And a lot of people are letting go of some of these other dialogues right now. Letting go of the talent management processes. That's definitely something happening. Barbara, I just want to go through this quickly because I know we're a little short time.
Absolutely.
Big thing to anchor on is feedback.
Exactly. Yeah, David. So just as we've been talking about, because of the importance of conversations, recognizing it's important to be essential, feedback is turning out to be one of these essential conversations. Again, it's paradoxical, like we started this section with. So on the one hand, feedback, of course, is historically known to actually elevate, threaten people. And that's the last thing you want to do in the time of COVID. And yet this is also a time, because of needing frequent touch points and people needing to know how they're progressing and how they're doing, how do you get it right? And so basically our suggestion would be this, David, if we go to the next slide. Really, we've been so conditioned to focus on helping people give the feedback. And actually our tip is, and if you've been around our work, you know this about us, and we've done research on it to study this, which is this: get your folks asking for feedback and really build that asking for feedback culture. Because while it's counterintuitive, but the more that you can inside of the organization get your folks accustomed to asking for feedback, that actually leads to people better giving of feedback. And so in that way, you accomplish it all. In that way, people can get the information that they need. They can know where they stand,
Barbara,
and they're not threatened.
We do have to wrap it up, but it's very interesting. In the time of crisis, all of these things are so relevant. Like people feeling less threatened with feedback, so important. Actually getting it really fast, so important. Having less bias, so important. And getting exactly what you need because you're changing and adapting. So I think people can only get the feedback they need, the way they need it, the kind of feedback, if they actually ask for it right now. We've done a whole ton of work on that. Barbara, thanks for joining us and sharing. Sorry, we're short on time.
No, that's good.
I realize how much there is to say.
Done.
We're trying to cover all 3 practices. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David.
And just Barbara runs a session every second week. If you're interested in performance management from that practice, encourage you to get into that group. And we'll be sending out links after the session with ways to do that for each of the practices. So thanks, Barbara. She runs a fantastic group every 2 weeks online. I encourage you to join that. Esther, great to have you with us. Tell us what's happening in diversity and inclusion. How many people have you been speaking to so far since this started? How many heads of D&I?
Thank you, David. We've been talking to hundreds of chief diversity officers, and diversity, inclusion, and mitigating unconscious bias is such an important, essential topic right now that we actually moved to weekly conversations because there's so much change and there's so much bubbling up in the organizations. And as you said in the beginning, it is very essential to take this opportunity in a way and really drive for behavior change right now and for culture transformation.
What are some of the trends? Tell us about the trends at the moment.
Yeah, so it was a little tough when you asked for top 3 trends because there's a lot happening right now, but out of the essential that we've heard from over 200 chief diversity officers, the first part is paying very close attention to your diversity numbers and understanding how your policies and how your efforts are impacting certain groups. And I will dive deeper into that. The second one is that over 43% of companies say that their immediate priority is making sure that they're returning to work policies. Yet at the same time, only 5% of employees are actually ready for that. So we will dive deeper into the second one as well. And the third one is there's a direct correlation between diversity and inclusion being actually tied within the organization in different business units and tied to the business goals and the efficiency of the culture transformation. So in the first one around maintaining diversity numbers, there are a few challenges to consider. The first one is that because of intense burnout, women are actually leaving the workforce, and a lot of chief diversity officers are flagging it as a massive challenge because we spent years actually helping women become have positions in leadership. And at the same time, what we're seeing right now is that they're realizing that it's not just a month that they have to balance so many things. It is a long-term impact. And as a result of burnout, they're making a decision to leave. And so how do we get ahead of that and within the next few months really launch essential policies and essential systems to allow for them to actually stay in the companies? The second one is, so often companies were saying that we are going to go virtual for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then we're going to return back to normal. And back to what you're saying, there is no back to normal. We need to build a better normal. So now a lot of employees do not want to go back to the office, and we're losing our essential employees, especially diverse candidates, to other companies that have gone virtual. So there's a big question around there is, do you actually need to go fully virtual, or do you need to build systems to combine the two within it? Curious how that resonates with you as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I think that it's going to need to be a lot of autonomy for folks coming back. There's definitely going to be people, even in 6 months, if this starts to pass, that are just not willing to come back to the office because of either their own or their family's health risks, or just the PTSD they've got from this, all sorts of things. So you're going to have to be really flexible, much more than many companies have ever kind of had to be. Also with some people who want to come in for a few days, and they want to come in 1 or 2 day a week, and all sorts of things. So it's going to be really key, I think, to think about that, and also be really curious about people's situation at home.
Definitely, 100%. And the last one there was around the systems that are being used. So when it comes to layoffs, for example, they're actually hurting the culture if diversity and inclusion is not considered. So we actually need, in the priorities, habits, and systems, we need to pay attention to the systems that are being most impactful right now. And how do we reimagine and redesign them to make sure that we don't hurt our culture?
Yeah. So some tips, you've got, a couple of key things. Everyone has different diversity challenges. So, every company, every team even. And I think you do need to identify the most essential groups and rethink your systems and a few months. I think that's right. Do you want to say more about that, the urgency of getting this right?
Yes, back to the point that I made around women leaving the workforce and a lot of systems not being optimized for everybody. We really have a very short window to invest in it and make sure that we're becoming more inclusive as an organization and mitigating bias in deeper ways. So the window is rather short if you really want to drive the change.
Yeah, we could lose people very fast, I think, as they start to see that they have to come back to the office, for example, and they just really can't. We could lose people very quickly, yeah. Tell us about the second one.
So the second one, it was very interesting when we actually started seeing the discrepancy between what leaders think when it comes to people's readiness to come back to work, to the office, versus what the employees actually think. And leaders think that over 40 to 60% of their employees are actually ready to come back to the office and want to, whereas those that actually launch the surveys within their organizations realize that often it's under 5%. And you just shared an example of it being, with one company, of it being under 2.5%. So the most important part here is actually paying attention to what your employees are saying and experiencing every single week and asking them. There is also a big risk in attrition for underrepresented groups if they're pushed to go back to the office. So that's another big one to start paying attention to. And out of the tips there, if we were to move on to the next slide, the biggest ones is, number one, maybe going back to the office actually won't make you competitive. So you will need to rethink your strategy in going virtual. The second one is things change very fast. So a lot of us are dealing with a lot of stress and grief and uncertainty and change. So don't assume that you actually know what your employees and teams are going through. You need to ask. And don't assume that if something was true last week, it's actually true for them this week. And the third one is we really need to look at measures to support employees within this transition, whether it's childcare, whether it's flexible work schedules, extra days off. And the best way to do that is, again, to use, for instance, the power of employee resource groups or business resource groups to tell us what the employees really need and what is most essential for them in that transition.
Yeah, we need to be really close to the trends and really flexible, but really close to what people are needing and really responding to that. And then the third one,
the third one is increasing the diversity and inclusion impact. So chief diversity officers are saying that all of the D&I challenges that existed within the organization but were not seen are now really exacerbated and kind of put up to the surface across so many organizations due to high stress, uncertainty, change. And so within that, if there's no leadership buy-in, then the budgets for diversity and inclusion are being cut, and the importance of diversity and inclusion is being reduced, which leads to long-term pretty much harm within the organization. And the last one here is that training is actually being deprioritized in times where leaders need the tools for mitigating unconscious bias and adapting to change. So if we wanted to really shift that out of some of the tips, and that's on the next slide, the first one is you need to tie your diversity and inclusion goals to overall business goals and really bring leaders on board. Right. And if you are with us and you're a CEO of a company, do not cancel your diversity council meetings. They're important, and you actually need to be hosting them at least every single month to have a pulse on it. And the second part is you really need to measure impact and create better measurement strategies for inclusion and mitigating bias. If your employees are struggling with adapting to change, there's a direct correlation between adopting the growth mindset and being able to adapt to change. So add that to your diversity and inclusion efforts. And the last one here is don't pause training. And I would love to hear from you the best practices around making it virtual, since you shared that in the past. But I think that's very critical in really addressing the fact that leaders really need the tools right now. So how do we give that to them? Wow.
Yeah, just a couple of points on that, Esther. I think, right now it can be tempting to cut that stuff, but what happens under high cognitive load, AKA right now, what happens under high cognitive load is your biases get much worse. So you get much more bias. You make much more, a lot more decisions that are based just on safety and a safety bias, or expedience and expedience bias. It's really an issue. If you haven't seen our work in bias, maybe Anna or Matt can put a thing in the chat on maybe beyond bias, but we've got a really powerful framework that literally mitigates bias in like 80-90% of people that learn it, digitally, virtually. Our framework makes people actively mitigate bias like 1 to 3 times a week after they learn this, in a virtual world. And it's an incredibly powerful framework. It's just literally giving people language for the 5 critical biases. So we can share that out.
I would also add to that, David, and I'm seeing a lot of comments around the George Floyd incident, and there's a lot happening right now, especially in the United States, around bias. And so we also decided to have an urgent session next week around helping leaders understand how to mitigate unconscious bias and support their teams and employees and having quality conversations. So if everybody on the line that are interested in that want to put equality in the chat, then we will also send the information about the webinar.
Fantastic. So there's a special session coming next week that we'll do on that. Fantastic. Thanks. And I know Khalil and you and others led the charge on that, really quickly swinging into gear. Thanks very much. Lots of people are interested. It's not just mitigating bias, it's also having really tough conversations right now. Yes. Like the skills for having those really hard conversations. We have a solution called Decide, which is actually really scaling and rolling out right now with many organizations. And it's literally a very light, very digital, very virtual program that activates, bias mitigation strategies in people. And so Decide is,
and that's an important point that you're bringing in.
The Decide solution, if you're interested in learning more about Decide, just put Decide in the chat. Someone will reach out. Sorry, we didn't think about that earlier. If you're interested in kind of the bias mitigation work, just put Decide in the chat. Someone will reach out to you and kind of send you some links and some resources. But it's literally you could teach your entire company to mitigate bias every week, completely virtually, completely scalable. any size with this solution, and it's got real data behind it. Thanks. Esther, back to you.
I was just going to say that it's very, very important point around mitigating bias, because there's a lot of data now saying that bias awareness training is just not productive and can actually cause opposite results. So it is very important to mitigate bias, which is why something like Decide is so important, because it gives us practical tools and mitigation strategies for different types of biases.
Right. Yeah, instead of trying to convince people they're biased,
Yeah.
we just give you language to see it in each other and then help each other call it out in a safe way. Not about sexism, racism, those things, but much more about brains have bias and we actually need each other to mitigate that. And we need common language for that. We need to literally have, safe language to call these things out. And so you'll see that in our work. We'll reach out to a few folks and kind of share what's happening there. Esther, thanks so much for joining us. Lots happening in DNI. You're now doing sessions every week. You've added more. Again, we'll send a link out to everyone with sort of how you can sign up for these sessions. They are limited to people who are in companies and senior roles, for example, in DNI. But thanks for the incredible work that you're doing. Sorry, I had to move us faster and cut you off there a little bit at the end.
Thank you, David.
For the incredible work that you're doing. And I know it's making a difference out there. So thanks very much, Esther. Some closing comments in the last couple of minutes. We want to give you a chance to finish before the hour. Some closing resources for you. This is a big one. This is the world announcement. This is a world exclusive. If you've been following our summit, we have an announcement. We have a Hold the Date announcement. Our summit this year is called Refocus, 3 days to change the world of work. It is literally a 3-day global hackathon to make organizations better for humans. We have completely reinvented it. And we are literally doing around the clock across 3 time zones, because we have big regions in APAC and EMEA. We are literally doing around the clock on literally how to change the world of work, make it better for humans. We're going to be giving you some of our foundational research in there. So if you're new to NLI, you can really dig into that, which never happens online. If you're in a global company, you can get your APAC team to actually watch similar content, your EMEA team to watch similar content, North America team. It's crazy. It's breaking all our heads, but it's going to be amazing. So hold the date. It's November 10 and 12. Whatever time zone you're in, you're going to have amazing 8 hours of content to actually collaborate and learn and all of this. So November 10 to 12, that's coming up. Suggest you try and keep that open as much as you can. Completely virtual, very interactive, 3 days to change the world of work coming up. We're very excited if you can't tell. I mentioned the learning strategy audit. Remember, if you're from an organization, you want to explore that, just put learning strategy audit in the chat now, or you've done it earlier, that's great. We are doing these free 1-hour sessions. The cost of the summit, much, much, much less than it used to be, like under $500 per person, and corporate members will get tons of tickets. So lots and lots of people can actually attend, but you'll see pricing and programming and all this stuff coming out soon. I will just say one thing, there's going to be a day on kind of from the lab, we call it. So a day of like the deeper science, a day on the actual talent practices, and then a whole day on how you apply this in companies. You can come to any session, any part, and there'll be a foundational track in each one, and then kind of what's new. So it's going to be awesome. We're scared we'll never go back to a real in-person one, and we're super psyched about it. So it's going to be quite a cheap ticket to get to the whole thing. We're hoping for thousands of people coming along. So the learning strategy audits I mentioned, we're also doing better normal briefings for C-suites. So that's CEO, CHRO, CEO. If you can get your C-suite together, myself, any of the folks you heard from today, some of our other senior people are doing these free briefings on Build the Better Normal about essentially stay okay day to day, make work from home sustainable, leverage the moment. The 3 kind of pieces we did today. Anna or Matt, if you can put that Forbes piece in now, actually, in the chat, you could copy and paste that, send it around to your team and say, hey, do you want a session from these guys on Build the Better Normal? So there's a Forbes piece just out last week on Build the Better Normal. You could share that and just put Build the Better Normal briefing in the chat if you're interested in that. Again, someone will follow up with you. So Anna's just put that in the chat now. You can see the Forbes. So cut and paste that if you can. And send that around, and we're happy to get a briefing for you. Again, those are no cost if we've got a senior team there. We have a podcast. It's over 100,000 downloads now. So this session and all the previous sessions are available on podcasts. Check that out on iTunes. It's in the new and noteworthy session as well. Lots of great sessions, including with Amy Edmondson, Bob Johansson from the Institute of the Future, all sorts of great stuff. Lots of kind of latest things. You'll see things from us every week. You can see some of the stuff on screen there. I'll leave that up in a moment. I'll kind of come back to it. But just a reminder, everyone you heard from today are doing sessions every week. We'll send a follow-up email with how to be involved in that. And finally, just I'll leave that up. But finally, if you're an individual contributor wanting to use this time to learn, we have some fantastic programs for individual contributors. Brain-based coaching is fully virtual now. It used to be, it's back. So you can do brain-based coaching virtually, become a better brain-based coach. We also have a 6-month certificate program in all the research. So you'll see all that at neuroleadership.com. It's a lot of great individual education programs. So I'll wrap up there, Gabe. Thanks very much. I'll hand back to you. Thanks everyone for being here. I really appreciate your attention. It's been exciting to pull all this together with everyone and share out the big ideas. We'll do a summary as well. Thanks very much. Over to you, Gabe.
Thanks a lot, David. Amazing presentation. A lot of stuff to digest there, I'm sure, for everybody. A big thanks also to Esther, Khalil, and Barbara for today's session, and to the team in the background that makes all this as seamless as possible.